Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Overseas Famous Podcast. I have a very great guest today, former NHL player, mental health advocate, Stanley Cup winner, which is super cool, Dan Carcillo. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. We're super excited to have you.
Thanks for having me, bro.
First question, Stanley Cup. I always loved the tradition of the Stanley Cup and how athletes, it's not like the championship goes with you. I like how you guys carry the cup. You get a day with the cup. What did you do with the cup your specific day?
Yeah, so the first one that I won in 2013, I brought home to my hometown, so King City, Ontario. When I grew up, we had about 7,500 people in the town. Now at that time, there was probably like around 20, 25,000, but everything really revolved around the community rink. There was one road in, so we started at the firehouse, did a little parade down kind of Main Street to the rink. And then we had a lot of people obviously drive in from Toronto and surrounding areas. Hockey's extremely popular in Ontario, and signed for about 2,500, 3,000 people. Raised a lot of money for cystic fibrosis, one of my friend's sisters who ended up passing away from that disease. And then just spent time with family, then went up to my grandparents, to their backyard in Toronto, spent most of the day there, obviously took it home to my house. And then we doubled back to King City at night. We went to Four Corners, which is the local kind of bar. And then that was the day, wrapped around like 1 a.m.
That's great. It's such an interesting concept. I love that. It's like you take that cup in your hands, obviously on the ice with the Blackhawks when you won, and parade it around. It's an amazing feeling. But knowing that you're taking it home, when you're carting that around, obviously your thought is, we just won the championship. I'm an NHL champion. I'm a Stanley Cup champion. But some parts of you are kind of, now what am I going to do with this shit when I get home? Like, what am I going to play? How am I going to play with this? So it's just so interesting. I love the traditions of the NHL. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, it was a cool day. A lot of it is definitely steeped in tradition. The trophies, it's a pretty cool trophy, big,
Yeah,
and demands a lot of excitement, especially growing up in Canada, for sure.
Is it heavy? It's got a little bit of good
Yeah.
weight to it. Nice.
Yeah, it's 35 pounds. And if you haven't won it, they don't let you touch it. And
Such a great.
you can't lift it or anything like that. You could touch it if I'm holding it above my head, but yeah, there's a couple rules.
I love that. You had a very unique journey to the NHL. Can you tell us about the moment where you thought you could realize that you would make it to that pro level?
Yeah, so growing up in Ontario, I was about 13, turning 14, and I had played minor hockey in AA. So there's a single A, double A, triple A obviously being the best minor hockey league, GTHL it was called. And I made a decision when I was 14 to take the jump to triple A. And I ended up on one of the best teams with a bunch of guys that were already getting scouted. One of the best players in Ontario, if not in the world at that time, was Anthony Stewart. And so we were getting scouted a bunch, ended up getting drafted in the 6th round to the OHL, and moved away at 15, turning 16, to play in Sarnia, Ontario. Then getting drafted, had a really good year, got drafted to the NHL, 73rd overall. But it was really when I was 14 that I had to make a decision. I was forced to make this decision to jump from AA to AAA. And I compartmentalized, you have a shot on this team. And if you want to use this as a tool to get out of your town, then now's the time to really apply yourself. And so mentally I did that. And then getting to Sarnia, moving away from all your friends, family, it's something that you mentally, physically, spiritually definitely commit to. It's difficult, but helps you grow up real quick. And I just ended up having a really good year that first year, scored 30 goals and was playing on a really good team with some good veterans and some good young kids. And I ended up getting drafted pretty high. And then I ended up graduating high school at 19 and I turned pro right away.
Wow. What were the biggest challenges you faced throughout that journey through those minor leagues?
Minor leagues was relatively easy. You just show up to the rink and you have your routine. And I had the food that I like to eat. And my mom knew that. And there wasn't really much like reading up about there wasn't social media back then. Obviously, the internet just came out, but there wasn't much in the way of like pregame and etc. So I still live by this, like what you put in your body that makes you feel good and not sluggish. So I continue to do that. And so the biggest learning lesson, I think, and one of the hardest things was just going through a year of hazing and things happen when you get into the league in the OHL. But in hindsight, you look back on the career that I had, I only fought like 3 or 4 times because I needed to in the OHL. I was a goal scorer, I hit, I skated, I pretty skilled. And when I got drafted, because I played the game so hard, running through guys, and I was knew that I was forced to put some weight on that summer. So I was 165 pounds when I got drafted, and when I got into pro, I was close to 190, 195, which is really where I played my career at. And then I ended up getting into a few fights early on in the AHL and did really well. And so you get, I wouldn't say pigeonholed because I wanted that, but I added
Mhm.
that piece of the game to my resume. And that was a little bit unique at the time because for the most part, back in 2003 when I was drafted to 2005, it was still drop the puck, heavyweights drop their gloves for no reason, and 2 seconds into the game, you've got these line brawls going on, albeit exciting, but no particular rhyme or reason to
Mhm.
why these guys were fighting other than to get the crowd in and they had a job to do. And so I brought this different level of mentality towards I'm going to make somebody fight me, right? I'm going to go and hit somebody. I'm going to get on their best player and get him thinking about me. And then if I have to, like most games, then I'll stick up for myself, or if I have to, I'll stick up for one of my teammates. And really tried to, I wouldn't say consciously change the role, but wanted to be a really good player and just have other people know that I could stick up for myself and my teammates.
Was that new? You talked about a lot of those enforcers at that time period were just these guys that were obviously anyone who plays in the NHL is skilled. I love when people always make those comparisons of the NBA and things and be like, how is that? I'm like, everyone who plays at professional level is the greatest athlete of all time. But when you look at the physical part in that enforcer role, the enforcers were more, like you said, bigger, just huge dudes throwing gloves right off the bat. When you got into that role, like you said, you were skilled, you could play. They called you the car. I love the car bomb because you would just fly in and hit, which is great because you were fast, you were a good skater, but you also added that level of physicality. Philadelphia, Chicago, two major cities that love that. They love you playing hard, you going all out. It's what we as fans, it's what I grew up with growing up in the Philadelphia area. You fought, and you really represented the city very well with that because you played the game so hard. You were aggressive, but you could also put the puck in the back of the net. So that's something that really didn't exist. Would you say you were like, you had that, you don't see as many fights these days. They're there, but it's not as prevalent as it was. Were you like that got adjustment period where it was not just like bruising all the time, but guys who could fight, but could also play?
Yeah, I liked Wendell Clark. I liked Doug Gilmore. I liked
Hmm.
Steve Thomas. I liked these types of players. Darren McCarty, like that could obviously fight,
Hmm.
and even Bob Probert, like he could play. These guys can play, and unconsciously, I definitely emulated part of my game like that. But I grew up in a very blue collar
Hmm.
working type of town in Philly and Chicago. Like they like that, and one of the things I prided myself on throughout my whole career, and now even after my career and entrepreneurship, et cetera, is that nobody's going to outwork me. And that level of attention to detail and discipline that I brought to the sport, I just bring that at every level in my life. And when I grew up, my parents wouldn't let me play hockey unless I had straight A's. They said anything that you put your mind to, you need to do it 100% or don't do it at all. And
Hmm.
that really helped me gain this sort of attitude towards anything that I did. It just needed to be very hard nosed. And you can play a hard nosed game and also play a skillful game. And so when I got to Philly, it was funny because I got traded to for Scotty Upshaw and he was a big fan favorite. And just remember seeing Paul Holmgren trying to calm down the fan base and just say, give this guy a couple games and you'll see why we traded for him and you'll like him and the rest is history. But yeah, it was really nice and I was yearning for this when I was on the Coyotes, it's where I started my NHL career. It was such a dead market in the way of fans, and I always knew that I had the skill set and the game to be playing in a big market where people really enjoyed and loved the way that I played. And to be honest, my favorite team was the Flyers growing up, the Orange and Black and the Legion of Doom and Leclerc and Recchi
Hmm.
and Lindros. And so when I got to Philly, it was amazing, man. Like the fans were harsh, but they were welcoming and they respected if you worked hard. And 2010 run and that whole team with Richie and Carter and Pronger and Timonen and Briere and young Giroux and Hartnell and Billy Leno. Like it was an amazing group and a pretty sick run that I don't think any of us will forget.
It's funny the degrees away because one of my good friends who I was my trainer when I was playing at the time, he was good friends with Carter and Richards and I actually one night went out just like after I was just in the corner just chilling. He was and you guys went after it. It was a really cool team. And I remember I played in Roanoke, Virginia in the G League and there was a team called the Roanoke Express down there. I've never met, and that was my first real experience with hockey guys. Like I knew a few, but not to that level. You guys are a great time. Like hockey guys are just the best time. Baseball, hockey, basketball players are boring. Football players, like we're just boring. Like hockey, baseball, like those guys are just getting after it. It's fun. It's a fun time. So I always enjoyed those stories of that kind of the Flyers and when the Flyers are good, the city's happy. You look
Yeah.
at that, it's a fun group, great group of guys.
It was buzzing back then. Like the Phillies were in it. I remember we won a round and then we walked directly across the street to the Phillies like beer garden, and
Oh yeah.
it was such a cool time to be a part of a winning kind of atmosphere across most of the sports. And yeah, we as hockey players, we go hard on and off the ice, and there's not really an off switch. And I think that's part of the why we got dismantled. But you look at that team and we were winning. And so if you have a cohesive unit, when do you really get to know people and care about people is when you're off the ice and you're bonding. And then you bring that level of kind of care and intensity to backing each other up and responsibility. Like anytime we got to the rink, you were fully responsible for the job that you were supposed to do. And when you're around core groups of guys that I've been lucky enough to be around in Philly and in Chicago and in LA and in New York when we went to the finals with these teams,
Hmm.
the crux of why we were great was because there was a core group of dudes that no matter what, you knew that they were going to show up. So that brought a level of professionalism and intensity to your role. And if you didn't show up and have your things in order, you weren't going to play. You weren't going to get in the lineup. And so having that nucleus just really made everybody else around them good, which in turn made the team good. And we had great coaches to be able to know when to whip the horses and know when to let us run a little bit. It's a fine dance to building a championship team and then executing. It's a lot of hard work, attention to detail, cohesiveness, and a little bit of luck from the hockey gods.
The cool aspect of you personally with the Flyers, obviously you've talked about this before, but for our listeners, you're watching Entourage. All of a sudden in E's office, I'm like, whoa, like I know that jersey. I know that guy. How did that come to be? How did you get your jersey up on the wall of E's office in Entourage?
So we so I was playing for the Coyotes and
Hmm.
Wayne was our coach, and we had a game in LA, and they wanted to do a show on Wayne. And so E and a few of the guys, I think Dylan was there, and I know Doug Ellen, the producer, was there, and they were sitting in between. There's 8 seats in between the benches, and that's where a lot of celebrities would sit. And so I noticed them at the beginning of the game, didn't really think anything of it, said hello, love the show through the glass. And then I ended up scoring a really nice goal, dropped this guy Dahlman onto one knee, put a backhand top glove, and then usually when I scored a goal like that, the hamster would fall off the wheel and I'd start to get a little handsy and run around. And so I started doing that. And then I came back to the bench, I remember, and Kevin Connolly, the maestro on Entourage, was like, "Hey man, get us a fight." And I was like, man, in my head, the only guy that fights is Radius Ivanis. And I heard that he just did 23 one-arm pull-ups in camp. Like it's been, I'm like, I don't know if I want to be fighting a guy named Radius Ivanis. Anyway, I went out and he cross-checked me from behind, and I'm the type of guy that's a little bit of unpredictable. And so I knew that I was going to probably lose. So I speared him, tried to get the wind out of him, dropped my gloves quick, cut him with a few punches. And then he just came over the top with a couple. And we ended up, the guys came into the room after, and I remember just being on the training table with a pack of ice on my head and a pretty good headache, probably a concussion. And Wayne's, "Hey, the guys are out there. They want to say hi." And I just popped up, and I think we were staying overnight that after the game. And so we went out for some drinks after. And then I've known Kevin ever since then, since 2005, for a pretty long time. He's just a really nice, down to earth guy. He really loves hockey. And yeah, pretty crazy. We've known each other almost 20 years, which is cool. And yeah, man, we've just stayed in touch. And then he said, "Send me your jersey." And I happened to be on the Flyers, and he put it up in the office, and I was on a couple text messages on the show. And every time we were in LA, we hung out. And the one time we were in LA, we actually went to 5150, myself and one of my teammates. And so met a couple cool people through hockey.
That's incredible. You're really big now. You have lots of things with mental health and dealing with concussions, and your transition out of the NHL. It's a tough time. It's a tough time for many players. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, it was difficult because, like most players, like we don't how it is when you were a professional athlete as well at a high level. Like you don't necessarily get to pick when you want to leave and leave on
Yeah,
your own kind of accord. And so you're either usually forced out due to injury or just performance that you can't keep up anymore. And in my case, it was a little bit of both, but for the most part because of concussions. And I'd been doing it 12 years and 10 years in the NHL. It's a long time to be going 164 fights. And so I was dealing with a lot of concussion-like symptoms. I had my seventh concussion in 2015 with the Hawks, and I just knew that I should probably step away. That plus, we'd had our first child, we'd had Austin Wolf, and I didn't want to be an absent father and a whole bunch of things. Anyway, I decided to step away, and it's really when you get into civilian life and things start to slow down. You don't have a purpose, and then you start to really feel how you're doing. And I crashed pretty hard, went through the medical system for 4 years, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on different types of alternative treatment to try to get a handle on my brain health and quality of life. And it wasn't until I took an invitation to a farm where I partook in a high dose mushroom ceremony with psilocybin. It's the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. And at this time and continually, we're seeing that mushrooms enhance the brain and brain connectivity and help with neuroinflammation and help with all of the things that a concussion survivor would need in reconnecting brain hemispheres, et cetera. Pretty quickly from 2019, the summer of when I took that first ceremony, to 6 months later, I got brain scans back that were clear, no abnormalities, no deviance in my blood work, and all of my symptomology was completely resolved. And so ever since then, I've created a bunch of companies and have been a very staunch advocate for getting people these double-blind placebo studies so that they can understand and know what type of research is coming out of NYU Langone and Johns Hopkins and how it could possibly benefit their life. But those ceremonies, high and low doses, have completely transformed who I am. And I'm by far the healthiest version of myself. And I want other people to experience the same level of kind of peace, serenity, and really operating again at a high level as an entrepreneur outside of hockey.
I love that. And there's so many stigmatisms on mushrooms, on marijuana, on these natural from the earth substances that help control concussions, that help you mentally, and anxiety and things that ex-athletes face. And there's stigmas that they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is dangerous territory." But meanwhile, pharmaceutically, we're ingesting all kinds of chemically enhanced products that we don't know what they are, but they're considered safe and they're deemed acceptable by society. But we don't actually go down the route of what mentally could help us, that it's actually a natural herb, a natural substance from the earth that's going to clear it up. So I love what you're doing with this, because I'm such a huge advocate for that. And I'm very impressed with what you're doing and how you're doing, and being an advocate for something like this, because I think it could help so many athletes.
Yeah, man. I appreciate it. We're putting together like a transition program for athletes where I'm close to opening our first legal psilocybin clinic where we can actually use mushrooms in Oregon. And there's a number of different ways that people can get educated on this topic by going to clinicaltrials.gov, by going to PubMed, and by going to institutions, academia like Johns Hopkins to see the studies that have been done on end of life anxiety and smoking cessation. And at the end of the day, what this medicine does is in these high dose environments with a lot of preparation and talk therapy on the front end, and then what's called integration on the back end, the lessons that we learn in an altered state of consciousness, they really help to invoke in us these human traits that may have been beat up or lost. Let's stay in the context of an athlete. When we transition, we have to think about a new purpose, unless you want to go back and work in hockey, which is also fine. We usually have low self-confidence, we are injured, and we are dealing with symptoms that we may not understand. Our sleep is probably off. For me, I had impulse control issues, and I really didn't have the wherewithal to make good decisions because of, simply in my case, the concussions and the way that my brain was operating. And what these medicines do, mushrooms specifically, is they can give you these awakenings, and you can actually see and face trauma in these 5-hour ceremonies and bring those lessons into your life, and then break destructive thought patterns and create new ones. You have these, what's called these neuroplastic events over the course of 3 weeks, where who you were, you can actually leave it behind if you'd like and reinvent yourself. And the self confidence is there. The fear based brain, when we think about doing something, and then you have that voice that says, don't do it because this might happen and then that might
Hmm.
happen. And that voice is turned off for an extended period of time. And you intimately know and operate just off of your intuition and your gut feeling, which as an athlete, is always right. We're
Yeah.
not out there you're not on the court, and I wasn't on the ice thinking, well, I'd do this if I make this pass. Your head's taken off already. You just where to be, when to be there, and how to make that play. And that really starts to happen in life. I'm eternally grateful that I was shown this medicine. And I truly believe in order to keep what I have, I must create these opportunities for people to try this and to see how it can improve their lives. So we're really excited about Oregon, hopefully opening October 1 is the timeline. And we'll actually be doing transition programs for athletes. And obviously we'll be helping people that have, suffered from substance abuse, addictions, depression, anxiety, which I don't think are much more than being caught in these destructive thought patterns and behaviors.
I love this whole entire thing. And when you're speaking, I'm taking a lot of this in just as my transition and how difficult it was, but just the self-doubt I felt was my
Mm,
biggest one. I was so confident in what I was doing on the court. Like you said, instinctually, you knew you were going to make the right play. Even if you missed, you weren't letting it get to you. And then I just had so much self-doubt of, now what am I going to do? How am I going to
mm.
keep this going? So that was something that I dealt with. So just you're explaining, I'm like, man, this is definitely something that could help, because that is something we all deal with as athletes. You have to completely, you spent your whole life achieving greatness and building this whole resume, and all of a sudden it's taken away, and you're like, now what? Now I
Yeah.
have to do this again? Jeez, I've been doing this since I was 10 years old. So it's definitely something that I look at as so important. And with someone who has experienced both the highs and lows, you've won a Stanley Cup, the challenges, how do you see hockey going? Like, how do you see it evolving right now? It's just with all that you're doing post career, with all that's going on with concussions and things. How do you see hockey evolving to maintain a level that's safe for athletes when they retire, so they're not dealing with all these traumatic things?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, will hockey ever be safe? No. It's a full on collision sport. There's no out of bounds. You're moving at 25, between 25, 30 miles an hour. There's things that happen by accident, and you're going to get injured. And there's a lot of repetitive body and head trauma. Now, what I would like to see and how I would like to see the game evolve is basically just information, right? You're going to sign on this dotted line, but you should probably know some of these risks, which hopefully guys are, and the league now is not hiding this type of information, but giving this type of information so you can responsibly make an educated decision on if you want to continue your career. That being said, one of the things that I learned in my first ceremony was to stop negatively putting a spotlight on everything that's wrong with these leagues and move into a place of, number one, the medicine told me that we're going to help you heal your brain and your body and your spirit. And number two, what we need you to do is start creating programs so that you can catch people once they get out of this league. Because I talk to a lot of parents and answer a lot of these questions. Would you put your son in hockey? And my son's in hockey's and rec. And it's not about not letting these kids play sports, because cardiovascular disease kills a lot more people in this country and worldwide than concussions. It's just a matter of making sure that if they need the help when they're done, that the help is there. Because I have fully reversed any of these symptoms. We've done this program with over 360 people. It doesn't necessarily matter what arena, if you're a veteran or you're a sexual abuse survivor, it doesn't matter what arena you've gotten your trauma in. These are human traits that can be recovered. And these are human issues that we all deal with: the self doubt, the questioning of ourselves. And these medicines are here. They were put here on earth to help guide us and to help heal our brain. And so that's really what I'm focusing on now, is just building these programs to ensure that we catch people, because being a professional athlete, and I wouldn't wish it on everybody, and it's why it's so hard to do, is taxing, and people need resets. And so we're actually seeing athletes come to this knowing this, that they come before the season to get their mind and body and everything right. And then they're actually, some of them are coming during, I'm sure that you guys have the same thing. We had a Christmas all-star break.
Mhm.
And then at the end of the year, a lot of guys are coming to us and just wanting that reset before they start up again in the summer, and to just recover their brain. But cognitively speaking, like the cognitive processing that gets increased, and the visual acuity and auditory, sensory, all the things that make you great as an athlete, those get increased after you do these types of ceremonies. So yeah, it's pretty unique. And we're going to obviously be tracking on all this outcome data in our retreats.
This is fascinating, and I love this. I'm, like, interested because I think this is something even as a basketball player, like, I wasn't the concussions weren't to the level, but I'd take a charge and whack my head, and it would just be like, "Alright, just get up and play." But you probably had something, and you just pushed through. So there is some of those remnants of just damage that I'm sure is in my brain right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wanna go into some rapid fire questions to finish up today.
Cool.
Just nothing tough. So start off, what was the toughest opponent you faced?
That was probably Darcy Hordachuk in Nashville. And we used to actually train together in the summer. But yeah, he was something else. He beat me up pretty good.
What song did you listen to before the games get you pumped up?
That would be My Morning Jacket, Touch Me, I'm Gonna Scream Part 2.
Okay. I'm trying to think back of the time period. I remember Mac Miller, the song by Mac. Was that were you with the Flyers at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a
Yes.
ton of Mac Miller that was being played. There was a ton of My Morning Jacket, and then I brought some classic rock into the mix with
Love
Led
it.
Zeppelin and CCR. So, yeah.
I like that you're able to throw your own face in there as well.
Yeah, on most of the teams that I played on, I controlled the music. And what I would do is I would go to each guy, get 2 or 3 of their favorite songs, and then integrate one of those songs. And so when it came on, the guys would know. And it was actually Carter and who introduced me to My Morning Jacket, which is one of my, if not my favorite band right now, or has been for the last 10 years. And then you got guys like Patrick Sharp on the Blackhawks who loved the Foo Fighters, and so Everlong was his tune. But some guys have better taste in music than others. But it's good to pop their song on and look across at into their stall and them just give you the nod and just get these guys fired up.
I love that. Last question. If you could change one rule in hockey, if there was something that annoyed you when you played, what do you think it is?
I wouldn't necessarily change rules, but I would figure out a way to hold referees accountable
Oh,
for
I
for
love it. That's so
yeah.
good. That's exactly it.
Yeah, I'd figure out a way to hold referees accountable. Either they have to come into the press conference and answer questions about why they made the calls they did, or just hopefully they'd get reprimanded just like we do. But that would be that plus player safety just being a little bit more consistent with the suspensions.
And finally, the last, where can people find all the things that you're doing? What plugs do you have so people can find all the things you're doing post career with helping concussions and mental health as well?
Yeah, no, appreciate you asking. So at Daniel Carcillo 13 is my Instagram. I'm very active there. Carbon Boom 13 on Twitter, and LinkedIn's just my name. Facebook's my name, and our Oregon clinic is going to be experienceonward.com. And so everybody can find me on those platforms, and I try to be as responsive as I can and put my email out there. And if anybody's interested in any of the information that we're talking about here, feel free to find my email in my profile on Instagram. Reach out.
Then I don't want to like fanboy, but you never meet you're just like, that's a cool human being. Like they just get it. They're just like, you're like, I like talking, but they're just an interesting. So that's, you have a very interesting story, just a great career that you played, and what you're doing off the ice right now post career is amazing. So I'm so excited we were able to interview you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, buddy. Thanks for having me.
This has been the Overseas Famous podcast. We'll see you next time.